Okay, my name's Alastair McNaughton. I'm a self-employed counsellor, and I've been working for the last 4 years with aftercare patients at LEAP. You know, helping them with issues that maybe have not been fully explored in their treatment. And about a year ago last May, Dr. McCartney asked me to set up a family support group. Specifically, you know, there are lots of family support groups. There's a lot of support in Edinburgh. There's a lot of recovery in Edinburgh. But he asked me to set up something that would be specific for the patients and their families. So what I'm going to talk about today is more specific, you know, than what we've heard from Brian and Alastair. I'm only a year into this field, so it's limited by my experience and by my reading. So I put up there on the first slide, recovery is a family business. And the one thing that since I've been working with families, I've realised just how absurd it is really to work with individuals and not in that context of families. We all live in groups. So can we go to the next slide? Thanks, Paul. So this John T. Edwards, this was a book that I was recommended to read when I set this group up, and I've found it extremely helpful, his ideas. So he says, if a family member's alcohol or other drug use causes problems in the user or the family has a problem with chemical dependency. In the past, treatment providers have focused on the individual. They've focused on chemical dependency as an acute condition, and it's all been about brief interventions. Detox people, get them out, back into society. Fortunately, people are now coming round to a more holistic view that people do live in families. It affects the whole family. And it's a chronic condition. It's lifelong, and it needs a long-term approach to care, both care and support. So I thought we'd spend a little time just really talking about what people are recovering from. I've used the term chemical dependency, which is his term. Our group, from the beginning, wanted to find a term that was not about addicts, not about junkies, not about alkies. They wanted something that kind of got us away from that really quite unhelpful debate. Because what we think is that after detox, the pathways to recovery are all essentially the same, regardless of the substance used. So that's why I've used that. Some people may find that a bit clumsy. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. Can we go to the next slide, Paul? So I've used this codependency, I've used it broadly in this presentation to describe the way that people interact with each other. Family members, you know, they try their very best to adjust to what's happening in the family, and there's a drive to hold the family together. Can we go next slide? So the family is a system. If one part of that system is affected, the whole system is affected, and everyone in it to a certain degree. So in a healthy family, members are connected in caring, mutually supportive relationships. There's respect for individual differences, good boundaries, everyone has their own autonomy, people can communicate, they're adaptable, they're flexible and can move for whatever's happening. And there's effective parental leadership. I mean, the way I understand it is that the parents lead the family. Can we go to the next slide? But in chemically dependent families, that mutually supportive unit fragments and splits quite often. You get coalitions, you get maybe dad is the problem, so mum and the older children are in this coalition against them. It doesn't help. People are denying what's happening. You know, there's an audiovisual resource that we use, and there's a child talking and you know, hiding of problems, and she says, in our family we pretend that things are different from the way they really are. Yeah? Boundaries break down, and ineffective parental leadership. And you know, if the parents aren't in charge, if they're not at the rudder, what are the children supposed to do? What do they do with that? So I've put up what I think the characteristics of a healthy relationship is. And we have each of the selves quite well defined. They're in their own personal space, but there's movement, you know, indicated by the dotted lines, so that people can move together and move apart again. That's effective communication. But so often in the families that I work with, we have different kinds of relationships. Come to the next slide. One is rigid, you know, where perhaps you know, the family's split up, no one wants to talk to each other, there's no communication possible at all. Or in the other way, next one, you get this enmeshed kind of relationship where people are trying to do everything they can to manage what's happening in the family. And like it says there, personal space disappears, neutral space disappears, autonomy is lost. And I remember on a personal level, when I was first married, we did everything together. We got really involved in this relationship, and it ended up that I kind of forgot who I was. I was part of this unit, but I didn't even have my own bank account. Well, that's changed now. It's not like that anymore. So that's one mistake I won't make again. Yeah? So moving on, the children. I don't have a lot of authority to talk about children because I don't work with children, at least not at the moment. That may well change. But I work with adults who were children, and a lot of them who grew up in chemically dependent households. And I hear their stories, and I have to help them work with that. So very often, parents prioritize their chemical use over the needs of the children. How many times have we found that? We know that children don't get their physical or emotional needs met, and that might be in the most awful, deprived part of Edinburgh, or the same in Barnton, or anywhere else. It's the details change, but the underlying principles are always the same. What I've found is that the effects on children's self-esteem are deep and lasting. Children take things personally, very self-absorbed. I remember as a child listening to my mum and dad arguing, and I always thought it was about me. I still think it's all about me. That's another story. But you know, this is a common theme. If they really loved me, they would stop using. They would stop doing this, whatever it is that they're doing. So if they continue to use, well, then they don't love me. And if they don't love me, well, I must be really bad. So what does that do to a child? Stigma has been mentioned. Comes up a lot in these events. Chemical dependents are generally perceived as posing threat to communities. Communities respond by ostracizing them. The amount of violence, theft, property damage, risk of blood-borne viruses, people get defensive about all of that stuff. So in some communities, families suffering from the effects of dependency are marginalised and become the focus of negativity as the community acts to protect itself. But in others, where, different communities where it's more widespread, family members are kind of, well, why don't you lighten up? Why don't you, join in? So we're left then with the effects on the family for that. Family members can't confide in their friends and relatives. We have a couple of women in our group who completely cut themselves off from their families because they couldn't admit what was going on. They're cut off from the natural support networks. They avoid seeking professional help in case the family is fragmented, the children are taken into care, and they retreat into isolation, hoping it will pass. Yeah. So people try and control this, they try and control what's happening. And we hear this so often in our group. The lengths that people go, hiding money, hiding booze, throwing drugs down the toilet, cutting up credit cards, making ultimatums from which they later back down, the silent treatment, pleading, begging, all of these things. Other things that people do, make excuses. I'm afraid he's not going to be able to come in today, he's got a virus. No, he's not got a virus, he's pissed again. Agreeing that it'll be okay just to use a bit. Well, anyone who's worked with seriously dependent people know that this, I'm just going for a couple of pints. Bit sceptical about that. Paying off debts. One family that I've been working with recently, they've paid thousands. And these are natural responses for parents. I mean, we look at that and, I've written underneath here, enabling. Any act that gives a dependent person permission to use or to avoid the consequences of his or her using. Well, that's easy for me to say. What is more natural for a parent when their son or daughter falls than to reach and pick them up, to do what they need to do to help them through? We can skip through the next two slides because I've repeated these relationships. So, enough about the problem. What about the solution? Or a solution? I personally believe that family members have no power over somebody else's chemical dependency. We have ex-patients come to our group to share regularly, and their details change, very different stories. But the one thing that is common to them all is that no matter what my family did, no matter what they did or what they didn't do, it didn't make the slightest difference to my using. Now that is a horrifying thing for someone who's been trying to hold the family together to actually hear that nothing they've done all these years has worked. But it's the most important thing for people to accept, because that's where I believe that people's journey into recovery begins. Once they can grasp that, it's actually quite liberating. There's nothing I can actually do about it. All of this stuff, people, what's the natural response to pain? Try and play it down, try and deny it's actually happening. Dependents do it. It's not the chemical, it's not the drugs, it's not the booze, it's the job, it's you, it's the house, it's where we live, or it's not that bad. If it gets really bad, I'll stop. How many times have we heard that? And codependents use similar strategies. You know, he's not really got that much of a problem. But the one that I hear most is, we don't have the problem. Why are you talking to us? It's him that's got the problem. If you can just get him okay, then we'll all be all right. Well, I wish it was that simple. Because my own feeling about this is that this illness, this condition, whatever we want to call it, it affects everybody in the family. And the codependence is a mirror image of the chemical dependence. And the same pathways to recovery work for both. And I think that, you know, talking enough about problems contain the seeds of their own solutions. You know, a solution is simply a problem reframed in a different way, after all. So, I believe that recovery for the family depends on each member of the family becoming aware of the extent of their denial, confronting it, challenging it, and developing new strategies for living together based on personal responsibility, trust, and mutual respect. Sounds easy when I say it quickly, eh? Wish it was. But you know, that's what I see our particular job and the job of other agencies, you know, Al-Anon, Families Anonymous, all of these, you know, Vocal, WellDAS, MELD, all of the groups that exist to help families. Simpson House, you know, the wonderful resource at Sunflower Garden. You know, if we can provide a safe atmosphere of hope and optimism that actually recovery is possible, if we introduce people to people like themselves, take that wee isolated bubble of thinking, it's only me that feels like this, introduce them to other people who are treading the same road, they can learn from each other, and they do. It's the only thing that seems to work. Top-down stuff where we try to look at a problem and say, right, this is the solution. It doesn't seem to work very well. You know, if we ask people, what's the problem? Everyone has their own solution. And I believe that families, you know, each family is unique and they have their own solution to their own family problem. So part of that is rebuilding these relationships. Rebuilding them or building them in the first place in such a way as people can take responsibility for themselves. You know, there's one woman who comes regularly. She's been coming from the start. She doesn't drink. Her husband drinks heavily. Her son drinks heavily. Every year she buys all the alcohol for big family parties, which cause ructions. She ends up having all kinds of problems as a result of it. Well, she stopped doing that. She's putting responsibility, the way she puts it is, she's putting responsibility back where it belongs. Yeah, she's really quite an inspiring woman to listen to. One of the things that comes up is this one. Recovery has the potential to destabilize an intimate and family relationships that have survived the trials of addiction. Because families are very good at adapting and containing what's happening. And I don't know who it was that said it, but you know, opportunities for change occur when the pain associated with change becomes less than the pain of staying the same. You know, I think every organism has a drive to maintain the status quo, and change frightens us all. It certainly frightens me. So what happens then? The member who's been causing all the disruptions over the years, as people see it, suddenly decides that he's had enough, that he wants to get well, and he embraces recovery. He starts going to mutual aid groups, He has that psychic change. He's decided, I can't do this anymore. So now I'm back, and I want to take my place in the family. I want to look after the children. I want to look after the bank account, which you've never let me near for years. And, well, the families are frankly sceptical. There's a line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that goes something like, 20 years of drinking would make a skeptic out of anyone. And living with someone who's chemically dependent, who is adept at lying, manipulating, cheating, it would make a skeptic out of anyone. So people are frightened. You know, they talk about walking on eggshells. A lot of my family members talk about walking on eggshells, terrified that they do something, or they do something wrong, or they don't do something, and that so-and-so will relapse, and then it'll be their fault again. Because people are walking around with so much guilt. So a wee bit about Recovery Capital. You all know about Recovery Capital. If you don't, you can look it up on the internet. But it's said to have 4 main areas. Each family is unique. We've already stated that. And each member of that family, the using member, the non-using members, are going to be strong in some areas here and weak in others. And I think that recovery for everyone involves having a really good look at this, having a real assessment. Where am I strong? Where am I weak in this? What do I need to work on? And then everybody working on their own. Everybody working on their own recovery. Now, the chemically dependent member of the family may not choose recovery. And that happens unfortunately quite a lot. However, if the families have understood that nothing they can do is going to do anything about that, the only thing that they can do is to concentrate on themselves, then everybody's got a bit of a chance. If they go back into that old way of destructive helping, then the whole thing carries on as it always has. It's breaking that cycle, which has sometimes gone on for generations. You know, we have family members who grew up in dependent households, and then, strangely enough, they find dependent partners. I mean, how often do you see that? So the most useful way for family members to help the using member is to take a step back. And like we said, you know, the family is at the heart of the community. So if families can recover, rather than being in that bubble where they can't speak about anything that's going on, if they can suddenly then be proud of what's happening, proud of what their relatives doing, and as a family, look what we've overcome, they can talk about it to others. One woman is talking to a brother whose daughter has, you know, she has the illness, whatever you want to call it. In the past, she wouldn't have been able to do anything about that. But now she's able to help this guy. People become champions of recovery rather than isolated victims, and then communities begin to recover. There's I think it was last year, I saw a presentation by David Best, and he talked about, I don't know who did the study, but it was about donuts. And it was, if all your friends eat donuts, chances are you're going to get fat. Because it's what other people around you do. It kind of informs what you do. So recovery is contagious. So, almost finished. Recovery is about change, isn't it? We all know that. So I thought the best way to illustrate that was Lewis Carroll's pot-smoking caterpillar. So even he can change. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Alastair. That was really, really informative. I don't know if any of you are following Twitter, but there's been lots kind of going out on Twitter as you were speaking, and the chat room. The coffee cups are chinking out there, so our coffee is ready and waiting for us. No